Under the sharp brightness of the afternoon sun, bouncing off the polished gates of the Hillcrest Club, Jasmine felt the sting of being out of place hit her right away. She pulled her frayed jacket a little tighter around her shoulders, hoping it would steady her nerves, though she knew it was more of a habit than protection. With every step toward the entrance, the space between her and the people scattered on the front lawn seemed to grow. The neat hedges and shining cars, parked perfectly along the driveway, only made her feel more like she was walking into someone else's world, a world that wasn't built for her. As she moved forward, eyes followed her, and Jasmine couldn't tell if the air was really colder under all that scrutiny, or if it was just the chill that came with knowing she didn't belong. People's glances slid over her skin, some lingering just a bit too long. Quiet smirks surfaced, and she heard the unmistakable sound of whispered words behind manicured hands. Every little laugh or sideways look became another hurdle on the path to the entrance, and Jasmine swallowed hard, focusing on keeping her head up. She stepped inside the lobby, pausing for a moment to let her eyes adjust. At the reception desk, a big man in a crisp navy uniform barely hid his reluctance to acknowledge her. Even though she hadn't said a thing yet, Jasmine sensed barriers closing in around her, boundaries older than anything she'd ever tried to push through. It was as if, with one look, he had summed up everything about her, the color of her skin, her shoes that had seen better days, even the weariness in her eyes, and found her lacking. The other club members in the lobby made little effort to conceal their discomfort. Their faces tightened, and two women in pastel sweaters leaned together, whispering quickly while casting glances Jasmine's way. Jasmine could feel each second stretching out, every breath heavy with things left unsaid. Behind every stare and every calculated pause was something deeper, the long history of exclusion wrapped up in an afternoon moment. While she waited for the guard to speak, Jasmine reminded herself why she was there, letting determination slowly build back up inside her, even as everything else at the Hillcrest Club seemed designed to push her away before she could even take her first step inside. Jasmine steadied her breath and reached into her pocket, fingers closing around the VIP pass that had once belonged to her father. It was a small, worn piece of plastic, the gold lettering faded after years of use. Even so, the security guard at Hillcrest seemed both surprised and a little suspicious as she handed it over. His eyebrows lifted, as if he couldn't quite believe she was handing him a real club pass. He flipped it over in his hands, glancing from the card to Jasmine and back again, taking his time in a way that felt deliberate. Jasmine could tell this wasn't about following protocol. It was about letting her know she wasn't really welcome. The hush that settled over the room was thick. People sitting nearby started to watch, their curiosity not even disguised. It was as if every little detail about Jasmine became an excuse for further examination. The deep brown of her skin, her braids pulled back into a neat ponytail, and the old wool coat that had served her in many winters. Clutched under one arm was her father's hunting rifle, the dark wood polished by years of careful hands. While to Jasmine, these things were reminders of home and family. To others they were apparently just more proof that she didn't quite fit into Hillcrest's polished image. As the seconds dragged on, the security guard finally typed something into a tablet and, with a grudging nod, waved her through. Jasmine could hear a few muttered comments from behind. Someone wondered how she'd gotten her hands on that pass, and another actually suggested maybe she had borrowed it from someone who really belonged. A woman in pearls whispered to her friend about how Jasmine's braids weren't appropriate for such an establishment, while a young man in a tailored suit eyed her coat with open distaste. Even the rifle, something Jasmine knew was a precious family heirloom, seemed to some like a curiosity, not something that deserved respect. Jasmine stepped further into the lobby, her heart beating just a bit faster, feeling every pair of eyes on her. She reminded herself again of her purpose. Every hurtful comment and dismissive glance seemed determined to turn her history and traditions into flaws. But Jasmine had never let anyone else define her value or her place. Not here and not now. Jasmine pressed on, moving from the lobby into the main hall of the Hillcrest Club. The entire space buzzed with energy. Dozens of sleek cameras were mounted across the ceiling and along the walls, quietly capturing every angle. The audience in designer clothes, the polished floors, the club's trophies on their mirrored shelves. Everything, it seemed, was connected to screens in the lounge and even beamed online to exclusive groups filled with old money names. As Jasmine made her way to the registration desk, she caught glimpses of herself on the monitors. The image was jarring. She stood out so clearly, a contrast to the sea of pressed suits and pastel cardigans. Within minutes, her presence became more than just a physical reality. Someone, maybe one of the younger members, clipped a few seconds from the surveillance feed and shared it online in a group chat tied to Hillcrest's inner circle. The first post was a blurry video, captioned with a laughing emoji and words that stung. Who let her in? In the comments, the mean jokes piled up one after another. Some compared her braids to mop heads. Others asked if she thought it was Halloween since she dared to show up in that old coat. Even the rifle, so precious to her, became the target of snide remarks, as if she were part of a parade, not an invited guest. Jasmine, pretending not to notice the way people's phones flashed and the way whispers swelled in the air, kept her shoulders back. The pit in her stomach threatened to grow, but she kept walking, refusing to let the cruelty slow her down. It hurt, of course it hurt, but Jasmine refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. She wouldn't offer any reaction to the sneers, not even to the group of young men who openly snickered when she passed. She knew the ratio in their stares well now. It was mostly disrespect. 80% of the look seemed to say she didn't belong, but there was still that small, ugly part that was just twisted curiosity. In their eyes, she wasn't a real competitor, just entertainment for their own amusement. Jasmine felt the pressure building, but she drew in a slow breath and kept her focus. She had promised herself, long before ever setting foot here, that she'd never let anyone else decide what she was worth. Jasmine kept moving forward, doing her best to tune out the sounds of snickers and whispers bouncing off the marble floors. She could sense that, no matter where she stood in that room, she was a target, yet nothing prepared her for the moment when Marcus, a well-known face at Hillcrest and the son of one of the club's biggest donors, strode over with a grin that didn't hide a thing. Marcus was tall and always seemed at home in places like this. He wore his confidence like an expensive suit, and it was clear he felt the hall belonged to him. When he stopped right in front of Jasmine, the crowd seemed to hush all at once, every eye turning their way. Marcus leaned in just enough to make sure everyone heard, his voice loud as he laid down a challenge. He said, "Let's settle this, Jasmine. If you beat me on the range today, I'll quit this club for good. But if you lose, you can't ever set foot in here again." There was a heavy pause. Then shouts and laughter rose around them. Jasmine heard someone clap and another person whistle, as if this was all just a game on a lazy summer afternoon. The rules Marcus had set were harsh, but simple, and nobody doubted he meant every word. His friends, boys and girls Jasmine recognized from old news stories, fundraisers and graduation parties she'd never been invited to, looked on with excitement, as if they were sure of the outcome already. To them, this contest was entertainment. Jasmine's whole future at Hillcrest was just a way for them to kill some time. Within minutes, the deal was all over the club's group chats. People standing near the big monitors texted updates, and a few even started live streams for those back in the city to watch. The thrill in the air was unmistakable, but the excitement was twisted, fueled by the hope that Jasmine would be put in her place. She could see it on the faces in front of her. They were hungry not for a good competition, but for her humiliation. Jasmine met Marcus's eyes, steady and unblinking. She knew everyone expected her to back down or break, but Jasmine squared her shoulders. If they wanted a show, she decided, she'd give them one they would never forget. Jasmine stood tall, the old rifle resting comfortably in her hands, its dark wooden frame familiar after so many years. It had been her father's, an heirloom passed down through generations, holding the weight of memories from times much harder than this one. While most of the other competitors approached the firing line with rifles that gleamed under the overhead. Lights, sporting scopes and features Jasmine had only read about online, hers was plain but trusted. The difference between them wasn't just technology, it was history. It showed in every angle, every quiet comparison made by onlookers. While their fathers might have co-founded investment firms or sat on university boards, hers had worked extra shifts so she could practice at a modest range on the south side of Chicago. She could feel every movement being watched and dissected. As Jasmine adjusted the strap on her jacket and checked the sights her father had carefully aligned years ago, a hush settled for a moment, replaced by sharp whispers when people thought she was distracted. The conversation had shifted. The jokes lost some of their playful tone and turned mean. Jasmine overheard a man say, "No way she stands a chance against a club member, not with that old thing." A woman muttered to her friend that Jasmine was only there for the drama because the outcome was obvious. Even Marcus, confident and already parading his brand-new rifle like a prize, seemed to look right past her as if she were only filling in until a real contender arrived. But Jasmine's focus didn't waver. She repeated the ritual she and her father had practiced 1,000 times, steadying her breath, checking her grip, pausing to remember family stories he had told while teaching her to shoot. She knew the simple, honest lines of her rifle by heart, the small nick from when her uncle dropped it once, the way it always caught the light a certain way when the sun was low. People talked as if her background was an automatic disadvantage, as if money and flash meant skill. Jasmine knew better. She could feel the weight of expectation that she'd fail, pressing down on her, but she also felt the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly why she was there and whose hopes she carried with her to that line. Jasmine took a slow breath and closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the noise of the crowd, the click of camera phones, and the gleaming spotlights blur into the background. In that pause, she found the memory of her father, William, as clear as if he was right beside her. She could hear him in her mind, his words gentle but strong from the days when they trained on the windswept fields outside the city. He used to say, "Out here, Jasmine, your calm is your sharpest weapon. Anyone can panic, anyone can flinch. You stay still, you stay you." Even now, with dozens of people hoping she'd embarrass herself, she clung to that lesson. The cold glass and steel that made up the club's shooting gallery felt nothing like home, but Jasmine pictured the younger version of herself and her father, lying in the wild grass with the sun warming their backs. The metallic scent of gunpowder was almost comforting. It reminded her that she knew exactly what she was doing. She trusted her preparation. Every night spent practicing until her arms ached, every story her father told while cleaning the rifle together at the kitchen table. This was so much more than lining up a shot and hoping for the best. It was about showing, not only to the crowd here, but to everyone who had ever doubted her or told her she'd never measure up, that she had every right to stand her ground. It was about making clear that she belonged, not just in this club for a single afternoon, but in any place her dreams would one day take her. The people around her were ready, phones raised, waiting for her to make a mistake so they could laugh and share it online. It would have been easy to let her hands shake or her focus slip under all those eyes, but Jasmine dug her heels in and set her mind to what mattered. She grounded herself, not just in her skill, but in the deep sense of belonging given to her by her father's struggles and sacrifices. They might have had the fanciest equipment and the biggest names, but in that instant Jasmine relied on years of love, toughness, and a kind of courage that couldn't be bought or faked. The moment Jasmine squeezed the trigger, a powerful sound rolled across the room, temporarily drowning out the background noise and chatter. The old rifle bucked gently in her hands, just as it always had, but Jasmine barely flinched. Her eyes stayed locked on the target at the far end of the shooting range, its center glowing under the bright lights. For a heartbeat, the whole hall seemed to freeze. Then, with a soft electronic beep, the digital scoreboard above the lane updated, and a perfect score flashed across the screen. There was no denying it. She had hit dead center, right on the mark. A low ripple spread through the Hillcrest Club's main hall as the people around her reacted. At first, it was just a rustling of surprise, a few widened eyes registering what had happened. Jasmine could pick up on the shift in conversation immediately. The laughter and snide remarks that usually filled the air were replaced by scattered whispers and stunned looks. Some of the club members found their voices quickly, muttering to each other that maybe it was a lucky shot or the equipment had glitched. Still, no one moved to challenge the result on the scoreboard. Marcus, who was busy prepping his own expensive rifle, paused for a moment, his smile stiffening as he glanced at the score. Some people in the crowd who had been so sure of her failure fumbled with their phones, uncertain if they should keep recording or pretend they hadn't been paying attention. A couple exchanged worried glances, already calculating the impact on their bets and quiet side wagers. The air crackled with a new awareness. Jasmine had shown, with just one shot, that skill and focus could cut straight through their barriers and doubts. It didn't matter that her rifle was older than most of the spectators, or that her name didn't show up in any of the club's photo albums. Her ability spoke louder than any background, paycheck, or family legacy. Even the folks who couldn't bring themselves to cheer had to watch her now with a different kind of attention. The smug certainty that had filled the room was replaced with a different feeling, respect mixed with shock and even a little anxiety. Jasmine felt the change, but she just calmly prepared for her next turn, carrying herself as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Jasmine kept her attention sharp, not allowing the rising tension in the hall to shake her focus. She raised her rifle for the second shot, moving through the same steady motion she had practiced for years. Her breathing was calm and even, her hands sure, though the pressure in the air felt thick. When she squeezed the trigger again, the pop of the rifle echoed less like a shock and more like the expected rhythm of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. The digital scoreboard lit up with another perfect score. Someone in the back actually gasped, and the crowd felt instantly different. By the third shot, Jasmine could no longer sense mockery behind her. It was replaced by an uneasy silence and quick glances between people who just minutes ago had been so confident in her failure. Her third bullet found its mark with unwavering accuracy, and once again the numbers on the display proved her skill beyond any doubt. That easy amusement from earlier faded, replaced by a hush that spread through the club. The growing crowd leaned in, no one daring to joke now, not even in whispers. Jasmine's fourth shot was delivered with the same determination, her routine so consistent it almost looked effortless. The scoreboard confirmed yet another bullseye, and at this point, even those who had dismissed her at the start had to admit what was happening. The mood in Hillcrest was so different from those first minutes. Now, instead of smirking faces, Jasmine saw concern and even a little fear as people began to realize history might be happening in front of them. The cell phones still recorded, but their purpose had shifted. Videos no longer waited for a stumble to mock, but to capture a true competition, one that was rewriting the unspoken rules of the club. What started as a cruel joke was now impossible to dismiss. Every flawless shot from Jasmine eroded the foundation of entitlement and exclusion that the club had always quietly promoted. Those traditions, propped up for decades, suddenly looked fragile. Jasmine could feel the shift in the room, a new respect growing around her, even if it was reluctant. With each pull of the trigger, her quiet confidence made it clear she was not just competing, she was changing the club itself, one perfect shot at a time. As Jasmine lined up for her next shot, word of her performance had already escaped the polished walls of the Hillcrest Club and was blowing up on social media. Someone had slapped the hashtag Invincible onto a clip of her first bullseye, spinning it at first as a joke to the members' private group chats. But with every perfect shot, that same tag was being used in a very different way. Soon, posts with Jazz Invincible were popping up all over Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, but now with real excitement and genuine respect. Black women and girls from all over Chicago and beyond started sharing clips of Jasmine's shots with comments. Full of pride, some posted photos of themselves practicing at their own local ranges, saying they never thought they'd see someone like themselves commanding attention inside a place like Hillcrest. Others went even further, openly criticizing the club's old-fashioned rules and calling out the deeper problem of how places like this kept people out for so long. The conversation kept growing. The very challenge that was supposed to embarrass Jasmine was doing the opposite. It was forcing everyone watching, from long-time members to people who had never even heard of Hillcrest, to think hard about who gets to belong and why. The tone of discussion online was shifting as rapidly as the energy in the room itself. Comments flooded in, not just from strangers, but from people Jasmine had never met, rooting for her and saying that what she was doing mattered well beyond the match. Even folks who usually stayed out of debates about race or tradition were pulled in by the excitement. For every person who tried to downplay the importance of her performance, there were 3 more ready to set the record straight, sharing stats and stories to highlight how rare and powerful this moment was. Jasmine could tell something big was happening, even from her spot at the range. She felt it in the way the crowd's eyes now followed her with a new kind of hope, not just waiting for her to trip up, but genuinely wanting her to win. People who had never cheered for someone like her in this place before were now giving her small thumbs-ups or quiet cheers. What started out as a plan to shame her had turned into a demand for fairness and recognition, and Jasmine held on to that growing wave of support as she readied herself for whatever came next. Even as Jasmine continued to hit every single target, with exact precision, the cheering and the growing sense of excitement around her couldn't completely drown out the quieter, more stubborn voice inside her head. It was a feeling she had known for years, that echo of self-doubt that showed up in places where she was the only one who looked like her. With every squeeze of the trigger, there was a shadow of worry that maybe, no matter how perfect her aim or steady her hand, people would just see her as an outsider. She wondered if all they would ever remember about this day was that a black woman had dared to walk into the Hillcrest Club and made a scene, not her skill or determination. Her heart beat fast, not just from adrenaline but from a mix of nervousness and pure fight. There were moments between shots when the doubts pounded a little louder, telling her she might never truly fit in, that she would always be defined by her skin before anything else. She felt the weight of every expectation, the ones waiting for her to fail and the ones quietly hoping she wouldn't. But something else was happening inside Jasmine, building slowly with every target she hit. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel hope, the thought that maybe her doing well here could mean more than just her own victory. It could open a door for others, especially for black girls with dreams just as big as hers, who might see themselves in her and find the courage to show up where they never saw themselves welcomed. The small but genuine cheers, the applause that started among the crowd in hesitant bursts and then grew bolder, made her stand a little taller. The stunned looks that had greeted her at first were shifting. Some people gazed at her with reluctant respect, while others seemed to be rethinking old assumptions right on the spot. In the growing noise and confusion, Jasmine realized she could keep going, not just for herself, but for anyone who ever needed to see someone like her succeed in a place that once seemed impossible. Each shot wasn't just another point. It was a quiet stand against the doubts, hers and everyone else's, and she drew strength from the possibility that her moment on this range could be the beginning of something bigger. As Jasmine prepared for her 8th and 9th shots, the atmosphere at the Hillcrest Club felt almost electric. The tension in the room had shifted, thickening in a way that everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to talk about out loud. Just down the line from Jasmine, Daniel, the club's favorite to win, tried to hide his nerves, but it was clear to anyone watching that his confidence had cracked. His jaw was clenched so tightly that you could see his muscles jumping as he watched Jasmine, probably reviewing every round in his head and wondering where things had gone so wrong for him. Daniel had been the golden boy of Hillcrest for years, and he was used to a certain kind of applause and respect as soon as he walked into the building. He had walked in this morning with the same air, expecting, maybe even needing, to win without having to struggle for it. But as Jasmine lined up her next shot, Daniel was forced to see something he had probably never considered before. Her pure skill. For the first time, he was looking past whatever doubts or cliches he might have carried about her and seeing her as someone who truly belonged here, shot for shot. Across the room, other members exchanged uneasy looks. They were more than a little shocked by how quickly everything was changing. These were people who had for a long time believed the club's records weren't just numbers. They were proof of an order that kept everything comfortable, familiar, and exclusionary. That old record, set decades ago by someone with a name etched into the club's walls, was supposed to be unbreakable. Now, it was in real danger. Jasmine, a young black woman from the South Side, was standing right there, making club history and turning every old belief about who could achieve excellence on its head. Phones continued to record, but the mood was different. Nobody could deny what was happening, not even the ones who had spent years pretending skill was a privilege tied to last names or money. The weight of the moment settled over everyone. Jasmine's next shots would not only decide a contest, they would force the Hillcrest Club to look honestly at itself and admit, maybe for the very first time, that real talent was never about background or color, but about heart, grit, and undeniable ability. Jasmine moved into position for her 10th shot, and you could feel the entire Hillcrest Club holding its breath. It was as if the room had been transformed, not just a clubhouse full of chatter and rivalry, but like a quiet church the second before a big amen. All eyes were glued to her, even those who had spent years pretending not to notice people like her. There was a hush so deep that even the sound of her own heartbeat felt loud. Jasmine carefully lined up her aim one more time, focusing on everything she had learned, and then gently squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, clean and sharp, echoing off the tall windows and polished floor. Everyone looked up at the digital scoreboard in unison. For a split second the lights blinked, dragging out the moment. Then in bright red and white letters the words appeared: perfect score, new record. The old mark set by a long-gone legend had finally been broken after all these years. The floor almost felt unsteady beneath people's feet. It was like they were waking up to something they never planned for. The quiet absolutely shattered. What began as a stunned silence quickly shifted into a wave of reaction. At first just a few gasps, then spreading out into a low rumble of voices and disbelief. Some people covered their mouths, Others reached for their phones in a daze, capturing proof of the record-breaking moment. But underneath the shock was something new, real if grudging admiration. For all the years Hillcrest had tried to hold on to old traditions and keep certain people on the outside, today it was impossible to deny what Jasmine had just achieved. She stood up straight, head high and shoulders set, and there was something commanding in her posture that no one could ignore. For the first time, her victory felt bigger than just her. The sight of Jasmine at the front of the range, holding her rifle with such quiet assurance, shifted something in the whole club. She had done what nobody thought possible, not just for herself, but as a new sign of what could be achieved by anyone, regardless of where they started in life. In that one historic shot, Jasmine's name became more than just a line on the scoreboard. She had forced everyone in the room to rethink what mattered most, and showed that belonging was never about invitation, but about showing up and earning respect. As the excitement from Jasmine's record-breaking shot still hung in the air, flashes from phones and news cameras started popping all along the firing range. The video streams, which had been running quietly in the background, suddenly drew even more viewers. People tuning in from all corners of the city once news of the perfect score broke online. Just as the crowd was coming to terms with what had happened, Margaret, the head of the Hillcrest Club's board, walked purposefully onto the range. She cut a sharp figure in her navy suit, not hesitating as she stepped past stunned club members and straight toward Jasmine. Margaret stood tall, her face serious but unmistakably determined, and with dozens of eyes and cameras fixed on her, she reached for the microphone that a staff member handed over. In a clear, steady voice that carried right to the back wall, she made an announcement nobody would have guessed a few hours earlier. From this day forward, Hillcrest belongs to skill, not to family history or the color of anyone's skin. The words echoed through the hall, and there was a kind of collective pause, as if the whole building was waiting to see what would come next. On phones and tablets, the club's live stream caught the moment, and within minutes, it was being shared, replayed and debated across the internet. Margaret's statement felt bigger than just an official recognition of Jasmine's win. For years, Hillcrest and places like it had been symbols of old privilege, places where most people assumed things would never change. Now, with one line delivered in front of everyone and broadcast live to the world outside, the board itself had declared that those days were over. This wasn't just about a championship or a record anymore. The conversation happening in real time online grew wide and heated. Some in the crowd managed to clap, the sound swelling with real enthusiasm, while others fidgeted, their faces tight with discomfort. A few members even looked outright upset, as if the ground beneath their feet was shifting for good. But nobody could deny that the moment was important. Margaret's announcement was a real milestone for people fighting to make closed-off, elite spaces more open and fair. Some of the applause was thunderous, some awkward and forced, but everyone in that room knew they were seeing more than a new champion crowned. They were watching history, the end of one era and the uncertain possible beginning of another. Daniel, who now looked like he had finally come to terms with everything that had just unfolded, took a careful breath and started making his way across the range. Gone was the bravado he had worn as easily as his club jacket that morning. He looked almost exposed, his hands open and empty at his sides as he moved past the other competitors and paused in front of Jasmine. For a few long seconds he said nothing, glancing at her with an uncertainty that hadn't shown itself before. With the cameras still rolling and a hush falling over both the crowd and those watching from their living rooms, Daniel cleared his throat and spoke up. "Jasmine, I need to apologize. I have said and done things out of pride and ignorance that I can't take back. You've done something truly incredible here today, and I was wrong to doubt your place in this club or anywhere else. The straightforward way he spoke, no rehearsal, no hiding, caught people off guard. Some in the crowd watched carefully, trying to see if this was just damage control or something real, but Daniel didn't flinch under their eyes. He kept going, raising his voice just a little to be sure everyone heard. "If you're willing, I'd like to work with you to start a new program right here at Hillcrest. We could open up the doors to anyone interested, especially kids who might otherwise never think about picking up a rifle or walking into a place like this. And I hope you'll agree to be the lead mentor." He left the invitation hanging in, the air, his past arrogance melting away as he waited for Jasmine's response. Some people shifted in their seats, looking a bit confused or skeptical. Was Daniel just trying to save face? Self-preservation was not exactly a rare trait among the club regulars, and a few whispered to each other, wondering if he would go back to his old ways once the excitement faded. Even so, the weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. For most, it was clear that Daniel's shift was sincere, the respect in his voice finally matching the reality in front of him. His willingness to step out of his comfort zone and publicly acknowledge Jasmine's skill and offer her a leadership role felt meaningful. The applause that began in small pockets gradually grew, signaling that maybe this was the start of genuine change, rooted in respect that had been truly earned. The applause continued to ripple through the room, sometimes loud, sometimes just a soft clapping from the more reserved members. Mixed in were a few cautious smiles and hopeful looks from people who, only hours before, doubted that a day like this could ever take place at Hillcrest. Among all that noise and shifting attention, something new began to quietly take shape. Between Jasmine and Daniel, what had started as open rivalry and even hostility between them was changing into something unexpected, a sort of partnership, built from the shaky, early foundation of mutual respect. As the days passed and the buzz of that historic event faded from the headlines, Jasmine and Daniel found themselves thrown together more often. Club meetings about the new inclusion program started cropping up every week, and the two of them often stayed late, hashing out details in the lounge while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At first, there was plenty of awkwardness. Daniel struggled with putting into words the things he was just beginning to understand about privilege and what real belonging looked like. Jasmine, for her part, was careful, still wary, not yet ready to let go of the past hurt, but she saw his efforts and responded with honest feedback. They ended up talking about more than just club business. Over greasy pizza boxes and cups of strong coffee, they found spaces where their experiences, while very different, could connect. Daniel started opening up about his own upbringing and the pressures he had never bothered to question. Jasmine, in turn, shared stories from her neighborhood, her first lessons about perseverance, and what it meant to carry her family's hopes. More than once, they sat in silence, letting the weight of things settle in before trying again to build understanding. Daniel went through a slow but real change. He became willing to dig into the beliefs and habits that had shaped him, not hiding behind old excuses. He started asking himself hard questions. Why had he been so sure of his own place at Hillcrest? Why did he ever think someone like Jasmine didn't belong? It was not a quick fix, and sometimes he said the wrong thing or grew frustrated with himself, but Jasmine saw that he was really trying. Over time, the edge began to leave their conversations. There was room enough for jokes, for honest support, and even for the beginnings of friendship, not the forced, kind, but something real, carved out by mutual respect and long hours spent working for something bigger than either of them alone. The past was not exactly forgotten, but it stopped being the only thing that defined them, and that small shift felt like an even bigger victory than any medal or record. The events at Hillcrest didn't just stay within the club's old brick walls. News coverage and clips of Jasmine's record spread fast across Chicago, reaching neighborhoods far from the leafy streets where Hillcrest sat. For the first time, girls who might never have set foot near a shooting range started seeing a path open up for them. Jasmine became more than a new champion. She turned into a kind of role model no one at the club had expected. Her name was mentioned during church conversations and in group chats, and it was not long before young black girls from every part of the city began asking about membership and how to sign up for the mentorship program. Soon, the club receptionist, Mrs. Dunlap, was getting calls from parents she had never spoken with before. Some wanted details on the program Jasmine was leading. Others wondered if equipment would be provided or what kind of community their daughters would find at Hillcrest. At first, some of the club's traditionalists bristled at the change. There were pointed questions at board meetings, and more than a couple of polite arguments over coffee about whether tradition was really at risk. Even so, with every new girl who showed up with nerves and bright eyes, it was clearer that things were shifting. The space started to fill up with new energy, hopeful kids, supportive siblings, and parents who dared to imagine their daughters doing something bold and unusual. On the first day of the new season, Jasmine stood by the welcome table, offering both a handshake and a steady presence. A small line of girls waited to meet her, each hoping to learn what it meant to take aim, dig deep, and believe they could break their own barriers. Jasmine saw parts of herself reflected back at her. Nervous, excitement, determination, the quiet hunger for a chance. No one at Hillcrest asked to see a last name or a family connection anymore. The only question that mattered was whether you wanted to try. Even long-time members who had resisted at first began watching the girls differently. Some whispered that maybe the club would find new greatness, while others quietly admitted to themselves that whatever old rules they clung to did not seem as important anymore. The change wasn't instant, but Hillcrest began, piece by piece, to grow into a place where hope and ambition, no matter where you came from, were finally welcome. A few weeks after the rush of new sign-ups, Jasmine arrived at Hillcrest one cloudy Thursday afternoon and was handed an envelope by Mrs. Dunlap, who wore a knowing little smile. The envelope was thick and formal, the kind you only got for big things like college acceptances or wedding invitations. Jasmine slit it open with care, expecting some paperwork or maybe another flyer for the mentorship program. Instead, what she found took her breath away. A gold-embossed card, her name written in neat looping script, announced that she now held a Hillcrest VIP pass. It only took a second for her to connect the dots. This pass had belonged to Mr. Lewis, a club legend who had quietly cheered her on from the sidelines before his passing earlier that spring. He had no children of his own, and according to the letter, had asked for Jasmine to inherit the pass. She had heard stories about how these VIP memberships were handed down like heirlooms in Chicago's old guard circles. They came with more than just free access to the best facilities. They gave rare, actual power at Hillcrest. With this card, Jasmine held the right to vote on board decisions, have her say in budgets, policy shifts, and even who received the next round of award nominations. That kind of power was something only a handful of people ever experienced in the club's long, exclusive history. She stood in the entry hall a little longer than planned, letting the reality of it settle in. This wasn't just about her anymore. With every choice she made, she now had the potential to open more doors, to loosen the club's old grip on tradition, or even to help decide exactly how newcomers would be welcomed. She thought about the girls she'd greeted last week and the shy pride in their parents' smiles. What happened to her would now have an impact on families across the city, some of whom had never seen anyone like themselves in spaces of influence. The weight of the VIP pass felt heavy, but it was the good kind of heavy, the type of responsibility she knew she had to carry forward. Jasmine understood, maybe better than anyone, that every action she took at Hillcrest would ripple out, showing again and again what was possible for anyone who ever thought power was out of reach. Not long after Jasmine officially received her new status within Hillcrest, the attention around her story began to change in surprising ways. At first, it was local reporters asking her for interviews and the occasional request to speak at events around Chicago. But soon, representatives from big-name brands, companies whose billboards dotted the expressways or whose logos flashed on national TV, started reaching out. Jasmine found herself wading through glossy publicity packets and meeting with agents who were all smiles and smooth talk. The money dangled in front of her with each contract was almost impossible to believe. Some offered enough cash to clear her family's bills for years and put her little brother, Malik, through college twice over. Yet, hidden within every offer, was a list of suggestions about how to present herself. The companies wanted her to straighten her thick curls, swap her old green utility jacket for designer clothing, and tone down anything about her background that could feel too specific. She was told this would help her have a broader appeal, that buyers and viewers would relate to her better if she didn't stand out so much. There was always pressure to fit in, to smooth over her edges until she could pass for anyone other than herself. Each pitch ended up sounding the same: success, but at the cost of part of who she was. Jasmine found herself thinking about late nights spent in her grandma's kitchen, about the advice poured over family dinners: if you trade your roots for comfort, you'll always be uncomfortable. It stung, seeing how quickly companies wanted to erase the very things that made her victories matter, not just her own, but the victories of anyone who had ever felt like an outsider in places like Hillcrest. So, Jasmine turned down every single offer. She sent polite but firm answers, explaining that her hair, her voice, and even her weathered old coat were not up for negotiation. Some people around her hesitated, worried about missed opportunities, but Jasmine felt relief. She knew the right kind of success was built on showing up as herself, not as anyone else. Her decisions started their own ripple effect. Other young girls, even a few parents, began conversations about what it meant to win on your own terms. Jasmine's stand was clear. Breaking barriers did not have to come at the price of copying the old mold. If doors opened, they could stay open for everyone, just as they were. In the months that followed, Hillcrest began to change in ways that most club members never would have imagined. The leadership committee, after Jasmine's appointment and the obvious shift in public interest, finally sat down to overhaul how they did things. The old set of written and unwritten rules for admission got a serious rewrite. Applications stopped asking for family references or club connections, and instead focused on a person's interest and willingness to learn. New training sessions were set up for everyone at the club. These were real hour-long workshops meant to tackle racism and help people see the gaps that had always been there. Sometimes the sessions were met with awkward silences or stubborn questions, but the club leadership kept at it, making sure these changes did not just look good on paper. For the first time, seeing black women and girls moving confidently around, Hillcrest started to feel normal, not like an exception to the rule. You could spot young girls comparing scores on the shooting range, or groups of friends laughing in the lobby without drawing curious stares the way Jasmine always had when she started out. Sure, not everyone adjusted at once. Some of the old guard hung back from the new programs, muttering about how things used to be. But even the most reluctant members could not deny that the vibe of the whole place was different. Membership started to grow, and with every new face, it became harder to argue for the kind of walls that kept people out. Jasmine, of course, did not have it easy just because the rules were changing. There were still pointed comments at lunch and the kind of backhanded compliments that could ruin a person's day if you let them. Missing gear sometimes turned up in odd places, and a handful of club veterans still acted like Jasmine's wins were some kind of fluke rather than proof of real talent and grit. But things felt less lonely now. More people, especially the newer ones, and some who had quietly admired her for months, stepped in if things got tense. A few older members, who had once been critics, now offered an encouraging nod, or even defended Jasmine in debates about how the club should move forward. What mattered most was that the battle was no longer all on Jasmine's shoulders. She was still tested, but she was not fighting alone. Thanks to her choice to be herself, steadfast, visible, unbending, Hillcrest was well on its way to becoming the kind of club where everyone could finally see themselves belonging. Eventually, Jasmine's journey at Hillcrest became much more than just her own story of hard work and stubbornness. Bit by bit, each time she stepped onto the range and focused before a shot, or showed up to a club meeting, even when she knew the room might be colder to her, she was quietly putting down foundations for others to build on. Young black girls who walked through those doors in the future might not know all about Jasmine's hardest days, the whispered doubts, or the way some people looked past her. But they would see her name on club records and maybe a picture from the day she first broke the club's old score, and they would feel that same possibility crackling in the air. Her tiniest actions, taking a breath and asking a tough question, at a board meeting, laughing with new friends at the snack bar, holding her ground when someone tried to minimize her accomplishments, became part of what made Hillcrest start to feel new. Jasmine never tried to be a perfect role model. All she wanted was to show, through her wins and her mistakes, that you could claim your spot without pretending to be someone else. Every challenge she met, and many times she had to push back, twice as hard, changed how people thought about who really belonged at Hillcrest, or any place that said it was open to the best. By just being herself, Jasmine was slowly rewriting the rules about belonging and who gets to be seen as a leader. It did not matter if most days did not come with applause or if recognition was slow. Jasmine knew that barriers were not only broken in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes the real change settled in during dozens of ordinary days, through simple acts of showing up and doing what you said you would do. Her dignity, her clear sense of self, became a kind of quiet blueprint for every girl who wondered if she might be able to do something considered out of reach. In a city where so many voices had tried to tell her she did not fit, Jasmine's story lasted, etched in club plaques, passed around in family stories, and felt in every confident glance exchanged by girls who saw themselves in her. Her victory stayed alive not just for her, but for every young woman after who dared to dream a little bigger.